Hello, my neighbor. We got a fun bit today. Check out this question right here. Can the government require that a plot of land be used for religious purposes forever? All right, so we got pulled up off of the bench on this one. This one's coming from the Friendly Atheist, right? And in the title of this article is called Hawaii Supreme Court Defends Secularism in Blistering Rebuke of John Roberts SCOTUS. All right, and in the byline on this one, it says, the justice blasted SCOTUS for twisting facts, favoring religion, and betraying the First Amendment, right? And we thought that this was a very fun bit because the question is really simple. Can the government require that a plot of land be used for religious purposes forever? The simple answer is no. Why? Because the government has no ability and no authority over religion, right? So there's a separation between the church and state. Why? Because the church is about my Father's business, and the government has no ability and no authority over administering my Father's business. So this bit comes off because there was a contract that was signed in 1922 by the governor of then Hawaii, the territory of Hawaii, right? So all the way back in 1922, right? And then he granted like 4 acres, it's a little under 4 acres. So he granted 4 acres of land to a trustee of a church, right? That's what he did, right? So the governor of Hawaii said, here you go, church trustee, you can use this land and you can use it for religious purposes forever. And that's what they had in the contract. So they had a contract. So there was a church entity who had a contract with the government entity, right? And then they made a deal, right? And it is what it is, right? So what's going on right now is that, the people that own the land right now, they want to use it for other than religious purposes or other than church purposes, right? As written in the original contract clause. And this has a lot to do with the sophistication of the landowner, right? Because once you understand what the church is, right, then this should be able to bring down your stress levels a whole lot. But obviously, whoever's running this case right here doesn't know what the church is. They don't know what the body is, right? And that's cool. It is what it is, right? And then the government seems to not understand, or maybe they do because I haven't read the case yet. I'm just going off of the question presented, right? But, just the government knows because it's in the First Amendment. Here, let me read the First Amendment again for the United States of America. Here's what it says. It says, Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. So Congress, the government can't make religion. They can't make a law. They can't respect any religion. So they can't say your religion is over this religion. They can't do that, right? Because whatever people believe, that's what they believe, and they can do that on their own time. Okay. So once you understand how to execute the trust, and once you understand creator creates creation, which is very difficult for people who call themselves atheists, because atheists, they don't have a God. They do have a God. They just don't know it. Their God is called the Constitution. Because we, the people, we created the entity that allows the atheist people to play in, right? So we created the United States of America, and then we within the United States of America, everybody's free to think and everybody's free to speak. Right? So if you don't believe in God, that means that we don't cut you off. You can still hang out, you can still talk, and you can still trade, and you can still get down with the people, right? But you do it within the secular realm, right? But whatever's going on within the church realm, right? That's my Father's business, and no atheist has any authority, or no government has any authority within my Father's business. Okay, and this is a difficult subject for people to understand, because they don't, like I said, they don't understand the terms and the conditions within the contract, and all constitutions are contracts. And then that's why we're always trying to point you to go look at your declared rights or your Bill of Rights, right? Once you understand what the people's declared rights and their Bill of Rights are, you're going to be cool. But who am I? I'm just one of the people with all political power who knows how to execute the trust. Okay, if you don't believe me, go ask an attorney, because we created attorneys to play in this realm too. Okay, all right, my neighbor, I just wanted to get that bit off my heart and off my chest because I thought it was a fun question. Can the government require that a plot of land be used for religious purposes forever? The answer is no. That's just a straightforward answer. No, no government has that ability and no government has that authority, right? Because the contract makes the law. Okay, my neighbor, remember this and we're going to be cool. All right. But, then again, you could have other terms and other conditions that are written within the contract, because when it says, this, I can go on this bit, because religious purpose means whatever it is that you're bound to, so like we've created the government and the government is bound to the contract called the Constitution, right? So they have to follow the terms and the conditions within that contract, right? And they can't deviate from it, right? But the government entity called the governor, they can't do that. They don't have that power and they don't have that ability. So if a man and a man want to contract privately together, or a man and a woman want to contract privately together, or if a woman and a woman want to contract privately together, the government has no authority and they have no ability to interfere with the terms and the conditions within that contract. Why? Because the people have all political power. Okay? As long as you don't harm man, woman, child, or the people, you're free to contract. Remember this, my neighbor. I just had to put that down too, because I can see how some people will say, well, that's not true. The government can interfere with this contract and that contract. If you're harming the people, yeah, the government can do that because there's terms and there's conditions as written. But if people are just contracting just to contract and then do trade amongst each other and they're not hurting anyone, they're free to contract. Okay, my neighbor? All right, we're done. And then you can write within that contract, I would like this piece of land, this piece of private land that I'm going to sell to you. It can only be used for these purposes only. A private contract can do that. A government contract and a private contract, they can't do that. So if a government is contracting with a private entity, they can't do that, right? But a private entity and a private entity, they can do that. Okay, remember this and we're going to be cool. All right, my neighbor, I just wanted to get that one off my heart and off my chest, because I like to talk and I wanted to just throw that out there for you. What do you think? Can the government require that a plot of land be used for religious purposes forever? Give me your answer. I would like to hear it. I'll talk to you in the future. Remember, nobody's having more fun than us. Bye.